When we think of time, we usually think of things like what hour it currently is, or how much more of my existence must I wait till an event happens. Time is a unit of measurement that humans invented to grasp the amount of existence we are experiencing, but time itself is not an invention, it's a discovery. And I say this all to paint a clear picture on the differences between an invention and a discovery. The invention being the unit of measurement we know as time, and the discovery being time itself. Recently, I was discussing the topic of morality with a friend, and they made a comment that stuck with me. They said, morals were invented by humans the same way they invented what is good and what is evil. And at first I simply agreed with them, but this comment kept bugging me. I was certain it was true, yet I couldn't explain the reasoning behind it. And the more I thought about it, the more I began to doubt whether this comment was actually true. So I began to ask other people the question, is what we call good and evil an invention or a discovery? And well, to say I was shocked with the answers is an understatement. First, what is good and evil defined as? Well, according to Google, or specifically Oxford Languages Learn More, it says good is that which is morally right, otherwise known as righteousness. On the other hand, evil is defined as profound immorality and wickedness, especially when regarded as a supernatural force. And we should also know the definition of an invention and a discovery. To invent something is to create or design something that has not existed before, while to discover is to find something or someone unexpectedly or in the course of a search. So based on these definitions, good and evil can only be an invention or a discovery. It can't be both. Now let's look at the arguments. Languages are something humans invented. This is different from the general term of communication, which simply means to exchange information. Many species predating us use communication, which makes communication a discovery to humans. However, languages such as English, Spanish, and Mandarin were invented by humans. Because of this, every single word from any language, including good and evil, should be considered inventions. I'll put the argument in this format so it's easier to understand. Premise 1. Languages are inventions created by humans to communicate. Premise 2. Good and evil are words belonging to a language. Conclusion. Good and evil are human inventions. Now let's look at the other argument. As humans, we are born with no knowledge. This is because everything we know has been learned through our experiences. This type of belief is known as empiricism. Because of this, a baby going into this world cannot know what is good and what is evil without first experiencing it. Throughout their life, they will feel happiness and joy, but also pain and suffering. This leads them to understanding which actions they should partake in to maximize their pleasure. Now let's imagine the first sentient human being. They begin to realize what is good brings pleasure and what is bad hurts. And this seems to prove that good and evil are concepts humans invented through experiences. But in order for humans to experience these things, they must have existed beforehand. This is because we must accept that the start of human sentience wasn't the start of the universe. Animals and other living beings predate us. We can look at a dog in pain and recognize that it is sad. And because animals seem to experience the same good and evil we do, which leads to physical signs of joy or distress, it almost seems to prove that these things are not new to the universe. So, Premise 1. Humans define good and evil through sense experiences most species experience. Premise 2. Some species predate humans that have shared similar sense experiences of good and evil. Conclusion. Good and evil were discovered by humans. Now let's critique these arguments. But how exactly do we do that? Well, first we should know what a valid and a sound argument is. A valid argument is an argument where the premises leading up to the conclusion are logical. For example, I could say, Premise 1, my pet Jerry is a fish. Premise 2, everyone knows fish love to swim. Conclusion, my fish Jerry loves to swim. This is a valid argument because, well, it logically makes sense. Jerry is a fish, and everyone knows that fish love to swim, so it logically makes sense to say Jerry loves to swim. But just because an argument is valid doesn't mean it's true. See, in order for an argument to be considered true, it must be A, valid, and B, sound. A sound argument simply means that the premises leading up to the conclusion are true, meaning if premise 1 and premise 2 are both true, then this argument is sound. It is true Jerry loves to swim. But does he? No? Huh. Well, there's no doubt about my pet Jerry being a fish, but to say that because everyone knows fish love to swim, therefore Jerry must also love to swim is not a good argument. This argument fails because of its use of the bandwagon fallacy. Just because a majority of people believe that fish love to swim doesn't necessarily make it true. This is not a sound Look at that. Now let's look at the first argument. This argument at first glance sounds logical, but let's take a closer look at the premises. Well, premise 1 says languages, which we'll call L for the time being, are inventions, I. So L equals I. Premise 2 says good and evil, let's just use M for morals, are words belonging to a language. So M equals L. Conclusion, M equals I. But look at premise 2. Good and evil are words belonging to a language. Well, yes, but no. We're so caught up on if M equals I, we didn't even stop to think if M equals M. Remember that statement of time I made in the beginning? Well, it's the same thing here. Like time, good and evil can be defined as a word humans made up. But also like time, that isn't the only meaning of good and evil. It's not arguing for the right meaning of good and evil, which means this argument fails. But just because this argument doesn't work, doesn't confirm that good and evil existed beforehand. We'll focus on this later. Now looking at the second argument, it again is valid. So let's look at the premises to see if this argument is sound. However, premise 1 already seems to bring some problems. I am human, and most likely if you're watching this, you're a human too. We know what good and evil is and how it feels like, but we aren't animals. So we can't really say for sure that animals share the same experiences as us when it comes to good and evil. I mean, can a duck ever experience what it's like to choose to sacrifice what little money they have to give to somebody in a worse position than them? Or how about we ask if a mouse can ever know what it feels like to give up a friend for being a traitor in order to save a large group of people? Maybe not, but we don't have to go too far to reach for examples. We can just go back in time. Back in time when there was no money or no loyalty to parties. Parties? What even is that? Billions of animals have come before us, and they have been presented with experiences that allow for either good or evil to take place, like sharing food. Both animals and humans do this, but this act of sharing, is it something animals did off instinct, or do they understand the idea of what a morally good action is? Knowing the answer to this is key, since we cannot compare an animal's instinct to a conscious decision from a human and call it the same thing. Unfortunately, this argument proves to be too vague to consider it sound. It isn't bad, but it again fails at what it needs to do, which is proving the conclusion as being true. Now this doesn't mean there's no answer to this question. It's just going to be difficult to find. The next step after critiquing is to improve these arguments, which we could do. However, there's another 2 arguments that are more complicated but are stronger and seem to draw us closer to a conclusion. So let's look at those 2 and hopefully get our answer. But first, let me introduce you to 2 very interesting characters, Plato and Nietzsche. Plato was born in Athens, Greece around 427 BC. I'm just kidding. Although I wish I could talk about Plato and his life, it would take hours for me even to scratch the surface about Plato and his philosophy. This goes as well with Nietzsche. So today we're only going to look at ideas that relate to our topic. Plato gives us an interesting argument on how good and evil, or morals, are not only a discovery, but they are in a whole different world separate to our world. Now Nietzsche, on the other hand, well, let's just say he vehemently disagrees. But let's start with Plato's side, and in order to look at his argument, we need to understand his metaphysics and epistemology. A man once said, "You can never step in the same river twice." This man was Heraclitus, a philosopher who believed that the world is in a constant state of flux and change, like a river constantly flowing. If you were to step into this river, get out, and step inside of it again, you wouldn't be stepping into the same river you did the first time. Our world is forever changing, and for this reason, nothing can ever be perfect. Another man, Zeno of Elea, believed that change was nothing but a mere illusion. He presents a paradox known as the arrow paradox to prove his point. If somebody shoots an arrow at a target, we see this arrow in motion. However, if we stop time real quick, the arrow will be in one specific position, right? I mean, it can't be in 2 places at once. Well, since no time is passing, it cannot move forward nor backward. But we can also stop the arrow right here. And again, because there is no time, this arrow cannot go forward nor backward, meaning at every instant of the arrow moving, there is no motion. So since there cannot be motion at any given instant, and time is made up of all these instants happening, it is impossible for there to be motion. Therefore, change is nothing but a mere illusion. So which is it? Is there change or no change? Plato decides to answer this question of change, and it goes like this. See, there is knowledge and there is ignorance. Where there is knowledge, there is being. Where there is ignorance, there is nothing. But there lies something in between these. Belief. Belief isn't nothing, but it also isn't a concrete being. It's becoming. It's change itself. To explain this better, Plato presents a theory known as the two worlds theory. We humans live in the world of appearance, a world filled with change, is subject to time, it's corporeal and imperfect. Here exists belief and becoming. We view this world through our senses, sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. Plato calls everything that we see particulars, things like an apple or a stop sign. However, there are things that we can see, but not really see, like morals. We can see good things and we can see evil things, but can you hold a moral with your hand and look at it? No, yet these things exist. See, Plato thinks that there is another world separate to ours that explains this phenomenon. The world of reality. An apple and a stop sign seem like they have nothing in common. One is edible and the other one, if you tried hard, it's not edible. A stop sign is not edible. However, they are both red. This is because they both share the form of red. What do the course of empire paintings, the Cologne Cathedral, and music have in common? They share the form of beauty. At least to me they do. We can look at these things and say they're beautiful, but beauty itself cannot exist in this world, only in the world of reality. This world of reality is unchanging, atemporal, incorporeal, and perfect. It is also where knowledge and being exist. It's a world we can't really see with our eyes. Instead, we see it through our reasoning. Okay, well, how does this relate with our question? Well, good and evil exists in this world of reality as a form. So let's clear this up and put it all together. Premise 1. To any set of things, there is a name associated with them. Premise 2. There must be a perfect form to explain these paradigms. Conclusion. Perfect forms exist, explaining observable paradigms. But we're not done yet. We're going to use this conclusion for our next argument. Premise 1. Perfect forms exist, explaining observable paradigms. Premise 2. This world is filled with change and is subject to time, resulting in it never being perfect. Premise 3. Forms must be perfect and unchanging, meaning they cannot exist in this world. Conclusion. There must exist a separate world filled with perfect forms. This world experiences no change and is timeless. Now we're going to use the first conclusion and the second conclusion for our next argument. Premise 1. Perfect forms exist, explaining observable paradigms. Premise 2. There must exist a separate world filled with perfect forms. This world experiences no change and is timeless. Conclusion. Forms are objective and transcend time. And again, we're going to use this conclusion for our next argument. Premise 1. Forms are objective and transcend time. Premise 2. Things that are not bound to time have always been. Premise 3. If something has always been, it was invented. Conclusion. Forms are discoveries. And finally, Premise 1. Forms are discoveries. Premise 2. Good and evil are forms. Conclusion. Good and evil are discoveries. Let that sink in. Alright, you ready? Now it's Nietzsche's turn. First, Nietzsche begins to trace the origins of moral language and how it has developed over time. The word good had a different meaning in the past. Nietzsche found that this word, good, shares roots to other words like aristocratic, privileged, and strong, while the word bad shares roots with words like plain, simple, and common. But this is no longer the case. When did things change? For this, we must go back in time. Early human civilizations have always shown to have some sort of person or government that rises above those who are weak. Nietzsche believes that a good example for one of these powers are the Romans. The Romans valued things that were good, things that made them stronger, such as strength, confidence, wealth, and ambition. Anything that was opposed to that was bad for them, but not necessarily evil. However, we look around in our modern day and we see none of these values. In some cases, they're even frowned upon. Here is where Nietzsche made an interesting discovery. To those in power, there must always be those who are powerless, the slaves. It was those which had no power who invented the idea of evil. This idea came out of resentment and hatred towards those in power. The slaves made all the values of their master evil. Nietzsche called this the ressentiment, a psychological state arising from suppressed feelings of envy and hatred that cannot be acted upon, frequently resulting in some form of self-abasement. To the slaves, the values, strength becomes wrath, confidence becomes pride, wealth and ambition, they become greed. It was the powerless who embraced their own weakness and promoted it as good. Things that made them weaker turned into their values. Values like humility, selflessness, and charity. Whatever is opposite to the powerful is good to the slaves. And Nietzsche calls this change in morals the slave revolt. A revolt that was successful in changing the course of human history. Now put your pitchforks away if you disagree with Nietzsche. I'm just a messenger. But on a serious note, I'm not here to tell you whether Nietzsche is right or wrong. And same goes with Plato. We are here because of one question, and Nietzsche's answer is already apparent. So, premise 1, there are different perspectives in life. Premise 2, different perspectives lead to different beliefs. Premise 3, different beliefs lead to different morals. Conclusion, different perspectives lead to different morals. Now let's use this for the next premise. Premise 1, different perspectives lead to different morals. Premise 2, a difference in perspective results in the constant disagreement of said perspective. Conclusion, morals are in constant disagreement. And we're going to use this one for the next argument. Premise 1, morals are in constant disagreement. Premise 2, if something is in constant disagreement, then it cannot be objectively true. Conclusion, morals are not objectively true. Now let's use this one for our next argument. Premise 1, morals are not objectively true. Premise 2, moral realism, morals being a discovery, require objective moral truths. Conclusion, moral realism is false. And finally, premise 1, moral realism is false. Premise 2, moral constructivism, morals being an invention, posits that morals are not discoveries, rather inventions. Conclusion, good and evil are inventions. Okay, now we've seen both arguments and both seem convincing. But which one's correct? I mean, both sides are valid, they make logical sense, but are they sound? Well, let's take a closer look to see if there are any flaws in these arguments. Let's start with critiquing Plato. See, this lengthy argument is structured very well, but it has one flaw. Its entire basis is on the forms, which if we can somehow disprove the existence of the forms, we can destroy this entire argument. So Plato's forms are supposed to be the explanation to a group of things sharing a similar quality. Look at the first part of the argument. To any set of things, there is a name associated with them. There must be a perfect form to explain these paradigms. Perfect forms exist explaining observable paradigms. Looking at the example I gave of beauty, these three things share the quality of beauty. But is beauty itself beautiful? Surely, right? How else could it be beauty? Here's where the problem occurs. This argument says that the form of beauty is now one of the group of things that share the quality of beauty, which means there must be a second form of beauty above this, which also must be beautiful, meaning it would have another form of beauty on top of that, and that form would also... Alright, okay, maybe this argument wasn't as sound as we thought. Let's look at the other argument. This one is also complex, but it has a flaw in the third part of the argument. Morals are in constant disagreement. If something is in constant disagreement, then it cannot be objectively true. Morals are not objectively true. See, premise 1 is okay. It is true that morals are in constant disagreement, but premise 2 is just not true. For example, imagine we have two individuals, right? Oh wow. And they're looking at a goat. All right. They're looking at a goat. One is looking at it from the front. One is looking at the goat from the side. The one in the front, he will see this goat, right? 2 horns and 2 legs. While this guy, you'll see goat with 4 legs and one horn, you'll see a unicorn. Alright, these are two different perspectives, and if these two individuals began to discuss what it is they believe to see, they would be in constant disagreement. But the thing is, there is an objective truth to how the goat looks like. Why can't we say the same thing for morals? Why is the music so loud? Cut the music. Thank you. So what now? Well, we've seen both sides, and it's not that simple, is it? You know, going into this, I actually thought I would find an answer. Instead, I stumbled upon restless nights in which I would ponder this question. Hours of thinking turned into days, and before I knew it, months had gone by. I was frustrated with everyone at the simple fact that this question lacked an answer. As I continued to ask more people, rather than answers, I only got opinions in return. But I was desperate for the truth. It was only when I came across a quote from the one and only Socrates that my view of this question changed. The only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing. At first I brushed it off with it being simple skepticism, but I began to recite this quote and realized what had happened these past months. This experience broke me and humbled me. Not that I was coming into it all arrogantly, but I had some pride in thinking what I knew was fact. I was deeply mistaken. My understanding of what is true was blinding me from the truth all along. It was a much needed revelation. I mean, how is anyone supposed to learn anything if they are a finished book? Our science textbooks get updated every year, and every year mistakes from previous versions get corrected. Why not do the same with irrational? Now, I'm not saying there's no answer to this question on the origins of morality. It's just, in the current state of the world, it's going to be difficult to find. But the first step to finding the truth is admitting you're wrong. And it hurts, trust me. It hurts to admit defeat when it comes with immense shame. But this deconstruction of the rational shouldn't be seen like this. Understand that true praise is not given to the one that never falls. It's given to the one who falls and picks themselves back up. Learning isn't a grade. Learning is failing. But admitting you failed isn't enough. You must stay persistent and get back up. Ask questions and seek out the truth. Though it will lead to stress and some mental breakdowns, you'll soon realize that you have gone past those in the herd. Ignorance is bliss. But if it's the truth you want, it won't come wrapped in a box with a bow tie. And with that, if you will, join me in my journey of philosophy.